this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate my technique for grafting sock toes to avoid the dreaded dog ears. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. Dog ears are the little stand-up corners that you can sometimes get when grafting sock toes. Now, there are several techniques for avoiding or dealing with dog ears, but today I'll show you the method I use most often. Let's get started. I'm just finishing up a pair of socks. I've grafted the toe of this sock and I'm going to graft the other one. But before I do, I just want to talk about why you can get what are called dog ears at these kind of corners of a wedge toe. And the reason is that you've decreased down to however many stitches you have. And then when you form the graft, when you work the graft, you end up with two new rows of stitches. So you have the grafting thread becomes a new row, but the stitches on the front needle form a new row as well. And so you essentially have that graft comes directly up from the edge of the stitches. So that's one reason you can kind of get this rectangular dog ear formation. I work a technique prior to grafting on that helps to keep this angled corner, or keep the corner more angled. And then when the sock is worn, it tends to be a little bit more rounded. Like this has not been washed or worn ever yet, so it's still a little bit stiff compared to what it would be like later. This sock I've worn a number of times, so when it stretches around my foot, you don't get these little dog ears sticking up. Before I graft these stitches, I'm going to pass the outer stitch at each end of each half over the second stitch in, and I do that in this way. For the first stitch of the first half, I always slip as if to knit. You can slip as if to purl, and when you pass it over, it's going to twist the stitch, but it's at the end of your toe and it's tiny, tiny stitches. I don't see how anybody is ever going to notice it, so you only need to slip as if to knit. If you're a little wacky about how you don't want twisted stitches. So you're going to slip those first two. Only the first one gets slipped as if to knit if you want to. And then you're going to pass it over. This is kind of like binding off. You're just going to pass that over. And then you're just going to slip the rest of the stitches from this half of the row until you have two left, and then you're going to pass that last one. Nothing needs to get remounted. You're going to pass that one over like that. And then you can slip that one to there. So now you have to do the second half. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to slip as if to knit if you feel like it. If you don't, you can slip as if to purl. The second one you will slip as if to purl. And then you pass that first one over. And then you slip to the end. Now this last stitch is a little bit looser on the needle because that's where the working yarn is attached. So you want to make sure that when you pass it over, you kind of just snug things up a little bit. So now you're ready to graft. So now you're ready to graft, and you work this just like you would for any graft, which means you work the setup, and then you work the main repeated part of the graft, and then you work your final step. So I'm on the front needle, so I'm going to insert as if to purl and pull it through. The back needle, I insert as if to knit and then pull through. And that completes the setup. From now on, you do the standard stockinette grafting. The stitches on the front needle present as knits. So you're going to deal with these next two stitches by first entering as if to knit, because these look like knits. So you enter as if to knit and let it come off the needle. We call that knit off. And then the next stitch you purl on. And then you pull the yarn through. The stitches on the back needle all look like purl stitches. So as you graft them, you purl the first one off and then you knit on. And it repeats like this. I've done a whole video on just on stockinette grafting, which is a bit longer than this. Knit off, purl on, and then on the back needle, purl off because they look like purl stitches, knit on. And I always make sure that when I'm pulling yarn through, I keep it below the needles. I don't try to pull the yarn too tight at this stage. You can see it's a little bit sloppy because I will always go through and correct the tension later. I have the last 2 stitches, so the final step is to knit off, and the last stitch, purl off, and then I pull the yarn through. So at this point, they still look kind of goofy because I haven't corrected the tension, but once I correct the tension all the way across, this last stitch will not be quite as loose as it is. And you can see when I lift up this tail like that, you can see there's a little hole there. That's where I'm going to stick the needle through here. And then I'm going to reach my hand up. So at this point I reach my hand up, I've got the needle, and now I'm going to pull this yarn tail through. So one of the things that happens when you pull that yarn through is you can kind of pull on it a little bit, and that will help pull in that edge. But you're also going to adjust the tension across that graft to make the stitches as even as the rest of the stitches. You can correct the tension from the right side if you want to, especially at this end where we can see it's quite a bit bigger. I pull on the leg of one stitch and then I get its neighbor, pull on that one, and I adjust it all the way across. You can do it that way. I like to do it from the inside. So you can see along here there's kind of a gutter in between this row of stitches and this one, and that's where we're going to correct the tension. You can see what it's pulling on, so I'm going to pull on this right here, and then I come across to this guy here, pulling gently. You don't want to over tighten everything. But I usually plan for having to adjust the tension at the end of a graft. I'd rather it be a little loose than too tight. So then I check to see how that graft looks. It looks pretty good to me. Then I'm going to weave this tail in, but I want to go check back on the right side again and see how it looks. So you can see how this kind of is more angled and it's not real straight up. So it does help to alleviate those sharp corners that you can get. Now this sock has not been washed yet, so you do see a little bit of corner-ish looking, angled right here. But after they've been washed, especially after they've been washed a couple times and worn, it'll be completely smooth. So this sock has been worn a few times, maybe a handful of times, and washed a handful of times. So they've softened from being washed, and then having been worn a few times, they contour to my foot. The key to avoiding dog ears is in how you deal with those first and last stitches of the graft. The method I showed you today passes each end stitch of each half of the round over the second stitch in to help angle that corner. In addition, adjusting the tension of the stitches after you've completed the graft can also help. As with any technique, I would encourage you to practice on a swatch first to get the hang of it and to develop muscle memory before trying it on a project for the first time. For other videos on grafting, you can check out this playlist over here. And if you have any comments on this video or suggestions for technique videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.